So this week we are going to talk about textiles and sewing, which is a very exciting week, and it comes at just the right time, right before Halloween. So if you want to make your own Halloween costumes, it's on point for what we're up to this week. So with that, clothing is one of the essential things that all of us are wearing right now, it's a daily need. It's something that's all around us all the time. And sometimes, I don't know about you, but I really will almost forget that it's a made thing, that it's a thing that people have to put effort into, whether it's done in less than a second by some robot in another part of the world, or whether it's a thing that is done painstakingly by hand, knit with love from grandma, and comes through in that way. But it's definitely something that's around us all the time. Making sense of textiles, if we want to simplify it into 3 classes of textiles, these are the categories that I would use. There's a weave, which is like a plaid shirt, like what I'm wearing now, where you've got fibers that are stretched out on a loom, pressed together. You get this reinforcing system, this reinforcing structure, and it makes a series of thin strands into a panel. And so that is one classic way to make a textile. A knit is another way. And so most things you can either categorize into a weave or a knit for most textiles. Knits or sweaters, you'll see the little loops in them. They stretch a lot more than like a fabric like what I'm wearing might. And so hoodies and sweaters and those sorts of things, they'll stretch because they have a knit loop. And then there's felted things, where instead of really being in either camp, or sort of they can be in either camp, you do weird things to the fibers so that they're more just sort of mushed together. And there's some really cool stuff that you can do with felting, but it's napped or piled material. And you can get felting pens where you sort of stab into fabric and it turns it into this strange material. Very much in the way that, like, there are definitely animals that get protection from having a felted sort of fur. And so there's lots of things that you can do there, but it adds structure. And so you can get shapes out of that also, which is really neat. But this is not to overlook another category. There's also non-woven fabrics that are really important for us to think about. There's plastic sheeting. Like, I don't know about you, but I definitely had grandparents with plastic wrap around their couch as a kid. That was totally a thing. There's leather and pleather and all those sorts of materials that aren't really woven. They're just one big piece. And then neoprene, and then there's definitely more. So there's things that aren't woven. They're not put together on a loom. They're not knit, but they're definitely textiles that you could push through a sewing machine. So those sorts of things are also really important for us to consider when you're thinking about materials in this realm. Somebody last year made a really cool wallet out of leather. So there's tons of opportunity here. Another thing that's important, and there's no way that we could even remotely address this, is that when you're thinking about textiles, color theory is really important. And if you're a developer, or if you're an artist using something like Photoshop, you can dial in your colors really, really tightly, usually in a way that you don't have quite the same control when working with textiles. But thinking about how do you match colors, how do you pick complementary or opposing colors, how do you group your colors, those are really important, because in textiles, you can have really bold, crazy colors, but they need to match enough that they sort of work. And like, I think of 80s track jackets for those color combos that are unexpected, but somehow work magically, or sometimes didn't. But those color pieces are going to be really important for us to think about as we're thinking about textiles also. And one other piece, and this was an important addition, one of the things that's really valuable for us as we're thinking about textiles, a lot of people get into this space by just thinking about how to do repairs, right? Maybe your first goal isn't to make your own wedding dress, but you can make repairs and things pretty reasonably. Hemming pants or adding a patch, putting a button back on is something that has to happen for a lot of us at different times in life. And so a lot of people might have this sort of passing interaction with textile work just to be able to do these few things that are just sort of necessary daily life if you want to keep your garments, especially if you're trying to avoid the fast fashion world where clothes are just like replaceable. Then getting these skills so that you can maintain things is definitely something that's important. I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable repairing shoes, but there are definitely people that know how to repair shoes. And so thinking about how you repair and fix materials is a really useful part of what we're up to. One of the things that I found and included in these slides are these quotes. The role models in my life for textile work have all been women for one reason or another. And I loved learning more about the depth of culture from those individuals in my own personal life. And I really loved how they took their ability to control the world that was around them as a sort of quiet, steady, subversive ability to control their world. And it's really incredible stuff. The subversive stitch is a really neat one that you can read more and make some sense of, and how this fits into the world and how a person can really express their individuality through what they're doing, which is fascinating. And just worth bearing out. But making textiles, how they get made, and I'm going to play these with hopefully I think it's muted audio. Nope, we're going to mute the audio. But some of these machines where you have weaving looms, you can see these like crazy automated loom systems. Looms have been around for a long, long time. We're going to look at some old pictures of looms, but these are modern ones. Well, these are modern ones that hammer through making woven fabrics at incredible speeds. Let's see, let's hit play. And so you can see this unbelievable, can't see it speed of these machines where they're able to crank out textiles at such a high rate that we're able to feed our current fast fashion sort of understanding. We don't have any machines like this, but it's kind of interesting to see how things are woven together. And then these sorts of crazy RPMs, 1700 RPMs to make knits and weaves, where you've got all sorts of things going on. So you've got different crazy amounts of stuff. These are all basically from trade shows where people are marveling at the speed of these looms from different manufacturers. Whereas a knitting machine, and these make panels really, but knitting machines, when you get a knit machine like this, almost always they're making a cylinder of, no, go back. Almost always you're making a cylinder of material. And so in here, you can see it's able to knit. Some of these knitting machines are fascinating in that they can crank out very large amounts of knit work all very, very quickly. But when you do that, you've got these pieces that all have little tiny hooks. It's very much like recreating the manual process of doing all that knitting on an automated, tiny, almost ridiculous scale. And so thinking about the fact that many of our garments, the things that we wear without really thinking about it, they've passed through a machine like this or came from a machine like this, is a really interesting part of the process of how we get to the clothes that we wear. And you can be mesmerized, but I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of how it's made. And so like seeing these videos of machines running is mesmerizing. And there's tons of stuff to look at in there. This is with knits and weaves, there's also felting sort of as a process. These are all pieces from a friend of mine, Fruit Loops Creations on Instagram. She is an artist and comedian in Cleveland, from where I'm from. And she would by hand create these little characters out of felt. And so she did needlepoint felting, where she'd sort of stab felt pieces together. She'd make a body, sort of an armature, if you will. And then all of these colored pieces would get added on top, and then use a needlepoint felter to put it all in place. And so you get these soft sculptures that have sort of an organic quality. And I don't know if you're a big Animal Crossing New Horizons fan, but all of the characters in the most recent Animal Crossing, they all are covered with this texture so that you get sort of a felted, soft look on characters. It's something that people really find charming. And you can make these fairly easily. I mean, this is a lot of effort that she goes to make this happen. And you can think of it like if you wanted to make this bear, for instance, you need to build the armature out of pieces and then sort of imagine a thin layer of that color that gets laid over top. You buy the felt already pre-colored and then add it together to get the styles and designs that you want, and then lay it over like a shell or a skin on top of the armature.
I'm actually currently trying to use batting, which is you using quilting.
Yeah.
Trying to make something out of reusable materials, and batting is one of those things that, yeah, I probably.
No, you're good.
So I'm trying to felt with batting. Batting is something that gets us started a lot because people get a whole bunch of it because they think they're going to quilt, and then they just get rid of it. So I have a bunch of it that was donated to EcoWorks. Picked it up. Batting is not felt. It's not necessarily all wool. Sometimes it's mixed in with synthetics. But you can, if you have batting around, or if there's batting in MakeHaven that just kind of is there for people to use. I've been able to kind of semi-successfully kind of felt it with needlepoint felting. I'm currently kind of making it into these abstract mushroom shapes. But this is something that you don't necessarily have to, for your first foray, buy actual wool felt, or like wool roving is what they use. You can kind of just try it with batting, which is a little bit more of an intro, kind of find it anywhere sort of material.
Yeah, it's always good to know what to do as a cheap first step. So that's good that you've been having some success.
Yeah.
You're working on the big flower project for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. All right, so if you're felting is a neat one, it's an interesting textile process that it doesn't necessarily look like it's going to be for garments here, but there's certainly some that you can add in. We'll look at it a bit more. But so one of the things, you've got a fabric, right? That's a starting point for everybody, is that you need to have something that you're going to work with. But then after that, there's a whole series of ways that you could process it. And so we're going to take a look at different things that you can do. But as we go through here, here's another sort of where it's going, but hand sewing and stitch work. So within here, there's a whole series of hand stitches. And so these are the classic stitches that you might have learned in order to fix something. If you're going to do a quick repair, you want to add a patch, you're going to do something like that. These are the stitches that are the most common. Usually I'll end up, if you're adding a tubing, I'll do a whip stitch that goes around those things. There's catch stitches, running stitches. There's all sorts of different types of stitches that you might learn and use. These each have different purposes and reasons to go after them. A thimble is often very, very helpful so that you don't stab yourself too much. But the key here when you're doing this is that you want to think about what stitch is best in your context. And usually, if you're doing boating or climbing, or you're trying to build some sort of particular thing, the guidance for what kind of stitch is going to be sort of baked into those instructions somewhere. And so if you're reading from some reference material, that will be helpful. If not, most of the time, if you just do one sort of stitch, you'll be good. The invisible one is a fun one. You're basically hiding it behind the materials. You're binding with it, sort of be hidden behind there. But these are just the classic ones that might be good to use if you need them. And then the knots at the end is also important to be able to do. One of the things, since we're doing a lot with textiles, sheets, and fibers for this, knots are going to be an important part. And knots are one of the oldest technologies. You can even argue it's the very first form of programming if you want. It's getting a material to do a thing based on the way that you've arranged it. And so at some level, it's almost, if you think about it in a weird way, it's sort of like you're programming the material. And there's current research on how we can get that to work better with other materials. But one of the earliest things, the first things you're going to do if you're going to make let's say you're making a jacket, is you're going to need to cut it up. Cut up the pieces so that you can work with it, and you're going to use fabric scissors. This, my experience with fabric scissors, my earliest memories are getting yelled at about them as a kid. Don't touch the fabric scissors was very important. If I needed to cut something for homework and they were the only scissors that were in the right spot, still couldn't do it. They're only for fabrics. Paper and other materials will definitely dull them over time. In MakeHaven, they're all labeled with a ribbon, I think, most of them.
The ribbon might have been lost on one or two.
Yeah.
They try very hard to the easiest way to tell if something is fabric scissors usually is that it's kind of elevated. So it's got both of the blades are flat on one side, and that is to line up with the table so you cut a straight line.
Yes.
Regular scissors don't have that. They're kind of just like the handle kind of emanates outwards. So you can't lay it on its side.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to tell. Like scissors, fabric scissors always have like a flatter edge that you can rest against the table and cut comfortably. You can't do that with a regular pair of scissors. So if you don't see a ribbon on it, that's like the second way to tell is the shape of the scissors.
And also fabric scissors, if I were to pick up any random pair of scissors and try, and generally they're nicer, right? Like, and that's part of the reason why they're protected from people, from, you know, all sorts of Midwestern mothers. This was a shared experience amongst all my peers. When you pick up these scissors, they're just heavier and nicer, right? They've got a more of a purpose than like the weird elementary kid safety scissors that you might have used otherwise. So keeping an eye on these, you want to definitely make sure that you're thinking about the fabric scissors. If you're cutting fabric, you owe it to yourself to go find the fabric scissors. These teeth on this pair, these are so that if the edge of a fabric starts to fray, it won't pull threads very far. It also means that the edges of your pieces, they stay together surprisingly a little bit better if they have those teeth cut into the ends. So keeping the teeth on the edge of those scissors is useful. But a nice straight pair can be helpful when you need to really get in and have a predictable cut. These can be a little bit harder to actually like physically make the cuts with. But one of the things that can be really amazing to do with work, with any of your textile work, is hand embroidery. So hand embroidery is certainly an art unto its own, where you're leveraging the interplay between the thread and the material to try and get these textures. Usually it's done on an embroidery hoop. So some sort of a wooden ring that holds the material flat so that when you're sewing, all of the structure and the shapes stay in place as you're doing it. So that way you can get these nice regular patterns. And then once you pull it out of the hoop, it should be able to hold those shapes pretty well. Cross stitch is another big favorite. This is a lot of fun. There's been a big trend in cross stitch for swear words, and I absolutely love it. I'm a big proponent of sort of the counterculture piece of that. But you know, this like house thing was 100%, every house I went into as a kid had one of those in it. And I don't know why, but everyone's family had made one of those. And so it was just a thing that happened in the late 80s. It was just part of what it was. But you can do all sorts of crazy cross stitch and needlepoint to make all sorts of things. There's also tons of plans for these that are out there in the world where you can really make some fascinating things. And lots of these plans are free. So if you're interested in doing this, there's tons of free plans that you can go after. There's also some people are very incredibly good at lace work where you can make wild things. There's some videos of people making this stuff by hand, and it is very much an art, like any of the fine arts might be. And so, and I mean, in museums, you'll see lace work totally on display.
So
yeah.
I'm going to share in the Slack the TikTok account of a woman who does lace work, and she actually did one of RBG's collars. And she does several different kinds of lace work, and just watching her do it in her TikToks is just, it looks like there must be some sort of algorithm in her head that she is just like running a program, because she looks like she just doesn't make a mistake. It's incredible. So I'll share that in the Slack. It's actually really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it's incredible to see someone who's really fantastic at these just go for it. But one of the big things that we are going to do here at MakeHaven that's accessible, that isn't accessible on the couch at home, is machine sewing. And so just to put in perspective, machine sewing is super, super helpful because it can go very fast. So you can make things that would take much, much longer by hand, but it does come at a bit of a trade-off. When you hand sew things, usually your thread will go up and down across the material. And so like in a saddle stitch here, the top and bottom are reinforcing each other, and you have a very strong bond when it's hand sewn. Machine sewn, the thread can't cross beneath and above. So the two threads, one stays on top the whole time, one goes across the bottom the whole time, and they get them to cross in the middle of the stitch, which is great. But it means that once your thread starts to go on a machine sewn piece, the thread starts to pull everywhere. And so it's a noticeable difference. If you've ever had a thread pull out on a t-shirt, you'll notice that the whole thing just starts to fall apart. right? And so that's where machine sewing has its great utility in that it's super fast, but it also comes at a bit of a cost that its stability is a little bit lessened, but still worth it. We have a lot of sewing machines downstairs, and so the big thing that we need to do is put them all into context. Essentially, there's a whole category that fall into two-thread construction, and then there's the serger, which is in its own separate side category. So for two-thread construction, we have the long arm quilting sewing machine, and this is the brand new edition so that you can make your own custom quilts. That's a really neat one that we'll look at in a little while. The standard machine, though, is what most people might have had rolling around at home. And so a standard, and I have one of these, I got a sewing machine for my 30th birthday. And so sewing is something that these are the standard machines are what you're gonna definitely see most often. And they're for sewing straight lines, for being able to do basic curves, nothing too crazy. But they're very useful. You can make almost anything with one of those standard machines. You can do a whole lot. And so learning how to use them is really important. There's the modern ones downstairs, and then there's two antique ones that are both singers. And so I think their names are Aretha and what's the Aretha and Beyonce, and because they're singers, right? And so that's the idea. And so we've got those, and then CNC embroidery, which is there's one brother machine down there that will do it. And so we've got this one machine that will take a design. You can make an ink stitch and turn it into a full patch or embroidered piece. Then there's the fabricator, which is for sewing like tents and boat sails and through leather. That's a heavy duty machine that you really want to make sure that you know what you're doing before you hop on that one. And then the serger is essentially for finishing. So the stitch inside of a t-shirt, right inside the cuff where it's got a lot of threads that sort of loop over each other, that is done with a serger machine so that you have all of that thread to keep it down and in place. And it's there to sort of sew it over and keep it stable so that you don't have any problems from the material pulling up at the ends. But that said, here's the standard rundown that you might get from an old school sewing machine. So inside of a sewing machine, these have been around and operational for hundreds of years, which is kind of, well, yeah, hundreds of years, which is kind of wild. And they haven't changed a whole lot. There's some new things, they've got more stitches, but by and large, you're getting stitch threads that come down from the top, from the spool, and then threads that come up from a bobbin underneath. And so you've got to think about the tension between the bobbin and the top is the most common piece, but you get all of these different stitches that are possible. On machines, you'll often get sort of a straight running stitch or a zigzag. The straight stitches are the simplest and quickest. Zigzags should be used if your material is going to stretch at all, because then the zigzag can sort of straighten out when it stretches and then come back when it's unstretched. So that's the real reason why I'd use a zigzag versus a straight. And then there's these other crazy ones where you might want to hide the stitch, or if you want to reinforce a buttonhole, there's all sorts of different reasons why you might use them. But essentially the straight line stitch and the zigzag are the two staples of sewing machines. And then thinking about your tension is going to be important. You want to have the top and bottom be in the right tension compared to each other. If it's too tight, you'll get a bunch of wrinkles. If it's just right, it'll look like a nice even line, and too loose, you'll get a bunch of floppiness. This is actually probably, if you haven't badged yet on one of the machines, during your badging process, you'll put a different color in for the bobbin and the spool so you can really see the interplay of those two stitches, those two threads, to see how that works. But there's all sorts of these decorative thread stitches, which seem like lots of fun. I've never ever used, but they could be nice. One of the things I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time as a kid sitting in the back corner of Joann Fabrics while my mother would pick out designs for sewing. And so it was just a thing that I got used to, this weird flimsy paper that you'd lay on top of the fabric, and then you could sew or cut or do any of that. That was totally a part of my childhood, maybe some of yours by the head nods. But one of the things that's really neat now is that was never accessible because it was just on such large sheets of paper and you could never print that out. But we also have a large format printer downstairs. And so if you're really savvy about it, you can download PDFs now of designs like that and then print them on the large format printer and work directly from that. last year, Denise downloaded a design for a leather canvas bag that Adam Savage was selling, and she printed it at full size and used it as a template for the handbag. And so you can absolutely download those plans or plans like that, and then make clothing or accessories, all sorts of things from full size printed designs. So there's all sorts of stuff that you can get to with this. Quilting is another fascinating process, and this is 100% an art unto its own, and became newly accessible with this long arm machine here. This machine was explained to me as the high-end version, or maybe the Cadillac, or maybe the Mac of quilting machines, of sewing machines. It's absolutely the highest end sort of product you could get. And this setup, this arrangement that we have is a tool that's probably, when you take all of the different attachments and end pieces and all those things, this tool is probably somewhere in the ballpark of 12 grand, this long arm sewing machine, quilting machine. And so it lets you quilt in any direction, freely moving. It's very smooth sailing. So if you haven't tried it, or you haven't just moved it around down there, I would absolutely recommend you grab hold of it. Make sure the needle isn't going to snap, so it's out of the thread, but then just give it a glide. You'll be amazed at how easily it moves, but it will let you quilt in all sorts of directions. And then quilting is largely just getting fabric pieces and arranging them how you want, whether it's in these wild organic shapes or in pattern shapes like this. And while I've never personally made a quilt, it has been explained to me by several different people as, if you liked woodworking, quilting is basically the same thing, but in textiles. So especially if you're making cutting boards with crazy designs, if you can do that, you can absolutely do it with textiles and quilts, where you can lay these pieces out and get the designs to work the way that you want. So there's all sorts of interesting ways to express creativity here. Last year, Kate made a t-shirt quilt. That's a great starter project. It's a good one to do. If you've got a ton of old t-shirts lying around, and maybe you do, you can turn them into these sorts of things. The most recent quilt that was done in my personal family was from my grandfather's shirts, right? My grandpa passed. My mom got a bunch of his old dress shirts that she remembered him with, and turned it into a quilt. So those sorts of things can be like family heirloom kinds of pieces. When you put together a quilt, there's really some value added in there from that process. But in addition to that, there's also the fiber arts. So we have this, which has been across cultures. All sorts of different cultures have really been able to shine within the fiber arts, and some really are very identifiable with it. Like I think about the Peruvian, I have an acquaintance who's from Peru who was very prolific with his loom to make all sorts of woven things. But there's all sorts of different cultures have made woven textiles over the years, and really some incredible ways to express individuality, cultural identifiability with pieces like this. It's amazing across the board how weaving has become as universal sort of across human culture, and it has different richness from different parts of the world. Another thing that's really important in this space, if you're gonna talk to the people, knitting and crocheting are not the same. This lady, I will not play this whole video, but this lady very nicely goes through and explains that knitting and crocheting are not the same. I have been, and this is maybe the image that I wanted to get. For knit, there's these two needles where you do that, and crochet, you have a crochet hook. They are not the same in that in knitting, I'm gonna get this backwards. One of them, you're working a series of knots all at the same time, sort of working along a line. And the other, you're working one individual knot, so you can get much more organic shapes. Crochet is the one that's one knot at a time with the hook. And knitting, you set a series of sort of loops or hooks all on one of those two needles. And then the second needle helps you set the next round of things. So knitting is very good for making sort of linear pieces. It's harder to get curves and funky shapes. Crochet, you can do all sorts of shapes and all sorts of different dynamics. But there's many more knots that you need to learn. Some people will do both. Some people will only do one of the two. But the thing that I have learned over the years is try your very best to not mix them up, because people will be very bothered by it. And like they have different places. So taking a look at how they fit. Here's some knitting examples where you've got the two needles, and you can see here how a whole series is laid out across the two, or across one of the two needles, and the second one will let you go in and tie in all the loops. There you can do all sorts of crazy things. You can make stuffed animals, hats, gloves, even. You can make lots and lots of scarves. Lots of scarves get made by new knitters. And then crochet is also very accessible. So crochet is done with this little hook. It can be a little metal hook. It can be a larger plastic hook. You can get trivets are nice. You can get all sorts of fun shapes. You can see how these curve a little bit easier around the end, how you're not nearly as linear. You have like these little half moons that can happen, all sorts of designs that you can put in with crochet. There's a lot more adaptability with crochet, but it also means that there's a lot more like details to make that happen. Often with patterns that people are following, that gets to sort of a Zen-like state. Many people find both of these very relaxing because it's a lot of repeated movements. And so it's good, like movement for the hands. I've known a lot of people in my life. My sister will watch movies and just crochet. And so that's totally a part of how she does that, and finds it very relaxing to do along with watching a horror film or whatever it is you want to do. So all of those are neat strategies. Macrame is one that's really neat. I don't have a lot of personal experience with it, like performing it, but I do really like these pieces. This is more or less just a series of knots, right? And so the knots tied in certain specific ways give you different patterns and orientations. You can get these sort of spirals that come out of it. These pieces, a lot of hanging wall art is made as a set of macrame. This dream catcher thing is totally a neat process. There's a series of knots that you might come across that will, when pulled tight or pulled relatively tight, you'll get different forms that come out of them. And so these hanging pieces are pretty common for macrame. And you can go into very trendy shops and stores, and these sell as pieces of art for pretty high dollar. So it's certainly something to not just miss as like a weird tangle. It's an art form unto itself, and to get these structures and pieces is really fascinating. And this is also another type of textile work that will definitely pop up in museums from time to time when they come out of deep history. So there's all sorts of neat things. In addition to that, sort of in a similar vein to macrame and crochet, is lace work and tatting, and how you'd put these things together. And how this works is honestly almost a mystery to me. There are people who are very good at it. The TikTok account that Ileana knows all about will be fascinating to watch. But there are people who can envision sort of how to tie the knots to make these intricate designs. And it's something that has been, I think this is a medieval one. Then there's all sorts of different versions that run the gamut from, you know, this baby carriage to tablecloths to another thing that got covered in plastic from my experience as a kid is a handmade from the old country tablecloth covered in plastic so that no one would touch it or spill anything. That was absolutely a part of my childhood experience. What? Yeah, no, it is a fiercely guarded item, and it's totally a neat thing and you know, someone made that by hand, so it is a thing that's accessible. Even if it's a lost art, it's one that can be refound and made into something that's kept for generations.
I was going to ask, how time consuming is that to do by hand? But then I realized that one of them is medieval. So I realized that one must have been finished.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It definitely is brand new. It's very slow. What's up?
What is actually the process that goes on there?
So this image is pretty close. You often will pin things and then tie knots and then bring them in tight to those pins, and then you can pull them up and move them around. The actual.
You have access to the Slack. I actually linked a video.
Yeah, I think I do.
Video itself explains the difference between machine work and hand lace work.
Got it.
And that actually goes into like the differences what you do by hand versus what a machine does.
Yeah.
Which it's very short because it's a TikTok, so it might actually.
Yeah, cool. It's gonna pull it up. All right, here we go. TikTok.
So see, all of those pieces have thread on them, and she manipulates each one of those wands. I'm gonna call them. She calls them something else, but basically, you have, instead of just like one or two threads that you are knitting together, you have a line of them that you are manipulating, almost like a loom. And you are holding it in place with a needle to actually establish where the limits of your knots are. Yeah,
It's insane.
It makes absolutely no sense. There are some people who color code each of those fonts so they know which one they're working with. She does not do any of that. I don't understand how she keeps track of them.
Is that real time too? Like, is she just like
She a real person?
It looks like it.
She says it takes an extraordinarily long time to make something as simple as a collar.
Okay.
It is a hugely time-consuming task.
Which totally leans into the intergenerational don't mess this piece up,
Yeah.
right? Like if you've contributed several hundred hours to make it,
Yeah.
100% you're going to keep it very, very nice. And that is, there's another video that's linked in the slides of a person. It's back several pages, but there's another video linked of that, but it's mesmerizing to watch. It's of some person who's just an absolute pro. Same setup, same thing with the pins, and then moving around those little end pieces to get the design. But I can't imagine figuring out how that would work. Like learning that process must take years to get good at it. Then heavy duty work. So if you're working with, those are sort of delicate pieces that we're looking at, heavy duty things. Upholstery is a big thing that can happen here. Redoing upholstery on pieces is a fascinating process. You can see all these little brad rivets or brads that might get tapped into things. Actually love these as a feature on pieces. You can have leather couches, chairs that are, wood structures with padding and fabric on top. You can have all sorts of different types with, a very nice upholstery in cars. You can have it in museum level furniture pieces. And a lot of this boils down to like pulling up or putting in tacks with a nail and a staple gun. So if you have a piece that you like, I remember the set of chairs that we had it when I was a kid had a padded seat on the table and on the chairs for the kitchen table. And you could pull that off with a few screws. And then every couple of years, we'd staple on a new fabric once we had spilled enough junk on them that they were gross. And so reupholstering furniture can be a really useful way to keep things nice for a much longer time than it might stay nice on its own. Rug tufting is a huge thing that's very exciting here. We're going to make this full screen briefly. What? Oh, I don't want to cast it. We're going to make it full screen with this briefly. Here's an Oakland-based artist, and she has tufted through these. You can see the tufting gun comes up through where it spits yarn through a mesh, and then it holds its shape. This process is fascinating. We have a tufting class. Lila is a real pro at this. She teaches this class with 4 people at a time. We asked if she's busy this week, but we hope that at some time in the near future, she'll be able to run a class for the foundations people, maybe on a weeknight when you might have been here already, so that you could make a small like mug rug. But this is a combination process of putting in those loops and then also removing them or cutting them down so that you have a fit that is what you want. There's a whole series of guns. All of ours look like this down over here, but there's a couple others. There's not many. If you find out how to buy one of these, let us know. We're looking to see what sorts of guns are the best because this has actually become a very popular thing to do at MakeHaven very, very quickly. And so it's definitely something that's neat to look at. There's all sorts of rugs that can be made on all sorts of different scales. Starting off small and with plain geometric shapes is usually the best way to go. Hopping straight into drawing characters with eyes is a bit much for most beginners. Just because when you have a face on your rug, you got to nail it. It has to be just right. Otherwise, the rug looks surprisingly bad. So got to keep that in mind. But if you're really into making rugs, you can absolutely make rag rugs is another way to go. These are fairly common. They can be made out of any sort of leftover fabrics that you've got, where they're just sort of fabric rolled up in a tube, pushed in on a loom of some sort, and then tied tightly together. There's many different ways to do it. Some people love them for their rough and tumble nature. They're really hard to destroy. If you've ever walked around or used one of these, they're exceptionally tough rugs. And they're made from recycled materials. So it's a neat way to be able to reuse and reduce our waste in general. Another thing that becomes accessible when you get better and better at textile work is make your own gear. So you could make your own tents, your own boat sails. We can maintain boat sails here. I've seen someone do a boat sail cover get maintained in the space, not an actual sail, but the cover for a sail was fixed here. Learn MYOG is learn to make your own gear, is a website where they give out or sell designs for making those 6 items in the middle. It's totally a thing. You can also make your own tents. I would not recommend making your own parachutes, however. Generally a bad plan. Spring for that one if you're gonna use it.
I already made them. I thought I was supposed to be testing.
Oh no, that makes me nervous, Vincent.
The first round of testing, I just sold the company.
Oh, good. Then it's fine. Then
I'll be back about the testing.
yeah, you'll get 5 stars, I'm sure. Yep. The big thing with a lot of these fabrics for outdoor gear is ripstop fabric, which has, and this is just a teeny tiny sample, but basically it's a series of squares where every so often there's an extra strong fabric thread. And that extra strong thread is less likely to rip than the rest of the fabric. So if a rip starts, it'll be paused or stopped by that stronger thread. And so you don't want to have too many because then the whole material becomes very rigid and very heavy. But if you do it every so often, a square might rip or a couple squares, but it won't spread to the entire garment. And it works pretty well. It works so well that, like, I think it's Patagonia will offer to repair your gear for free or very little cost, because it happens so infrequently with their ripstop fabrics that they don't really need to worry about it. Plus it's good PR for them that they'll come and fix it. And then people walking around with patched gear is very good publicity for them. But if you're doing all of this textile work, you may also want to change colors. And so if you're working with things, there's many different ways that you can add or remove colors to textiles, but dyes and bleaching are good ways to do it. So there's chemical dyes of all sorts of different types. Indigo dye is how blue jeans get their blue. This is a common one that lots of us like to enjoy. But you have all of these other different types of dyes that exist. But dyes and stains are a fascinating topic within chemistry in a broader sense, and then organic chemistry is where most of them live, if you're trying to categorize them. And there's natural and synthetic versions. So you have natural dyes that can come from, in this particular video, this person is talking about using red cabbage as a dye, where you can change the pH slightly and it'll go from from a deep purple to like a lavender to red. You can even get blue out of purple cabbage. And then some other natural dye sources that you can use. And so there's a video here that's linked that you can check out and is really neat. There's also synthetic dyes where they can be made in a lab and you can get dyes that lock in very nicely. Some of the earliest reds, some of the earliest red dyes were not made in the same way. And so they sort of were chemically latched onto fabric and fibers. They didn't attach in the same way, which is why you'd get the almost comical, you put a red shirt in the laundry and everything comes out pink, right? That sort of an effect is because some of the earlier red dyes weren't washed off as well at the factory where they were used. And the way that they actually mechanically bonded through their chemistry to the fibers wasn't as strong as the indigo or other colors that got used. And so there's some interesting chemistry in dye science where you can really go very deep. And now you can get pretty much any color that you want, but it's definitely not like a one-to-one with a printer. And so it's not the same as like, I would like to have this much cyan, yellow, and magenta. It's a different process that has to be handled color by color. But the sheer breadth of color has made us sort of forget that at this point you can basically get any color that you want. But there was a point where very bright colors just weren't as accessible, and it was more surprising to have very brightly colored garments because the availability of that color just would be new. And that's why like royal purple was such a thing, because at the time when kings and queens were very much a part of the world, the purple was a very hard color to get as a dye. And so it was royal because they were the only people that could afford access to that sort of a color pigment, which is really interesting. Another way that you might deal with things is try and get color out of them. And so bleach is something that is definitely an exciting process to play around with. It's it's toxic, so you got to be careful if you're going to do bleaching of your own clothes, but you can get some really interesting effects if you take a garment that already has a color and then you bleach it out. Periodically, this goes in and out of fashion. I am not a slave to fashion myself, so I am never super keen to that. But the thing here is that you've got this ability to remove color and really get sort of, you apply a color and then you can remove it in a way that makes a very fashionable look. So you can get sort of a distressed look that comes in very nicely. So there's lots of availability there. One thing that you need to be careful about is that you can get chemical burns from bleach, which is often sodium hypochlorite. And so which is just a very particular chemical, a chemical burn from bleach is going to turn your skin whitish, and then that whitish stuff will sort of rub off after a while. You definitely don't want to have it on your hands for very long. And I'm sure you've all gotten a little bleach on you before when doing cleaning or other things. It's not great. You want to wash your hands thoroughly if that happens. And every so often you might get bleach that gets on a garment. There's even some like face creams that will bleach towels. When you're washing your face, some of them are going to discolor towels in ways that are maybe not the towels you have when company's over. But what's up?
Just very quickly, because we're talking about bleach. There's a couple companies that make an alternative if you really want to do like bleaching of your clothes. You don't want to use bleach. There is something, Jacquard, the company, makes something called a decolorant paste, which is not bleach, but has a kind of a similar effect as bleach, and it's much safer to use, not toxic, and you can't give yourself a chemical burn. So if you really want to try some like cool like designs by removing color from your clothes, there are options other than bleach. Just wanted to put that out there, because I don't know if like MakeHaven will let you actually bleach clothes here.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's something that you'd want to handle with care, and no matter where you're doing it, whether it's here or at home or in some perfect facility. That safer alternative is probably like now that I'm thinking about it, when bleach clothes come through fashion, probably in the sake of not having any bleach make it out to consumers, they probably use that safer material rather than actually sodium hypochlorite, just so that there's no residue of it on the garments whatsoever. Makes a ton of sense. But yeah, one of the things, especially if you're using real bleach, and it's worth talking about because it's just so ubiquitous, it's so cheap to get at a grocery store. One of the things about it is that it definitely can deteriorate or actually like break down the actual garment itself. So you got to be careful with that. It's totally something that needs to be handled with care if you're going to go after this strategy, but it can add a neat look. Another one, and this is something that we're going to circle back to. We're actually going to come back and have like a whole printing section towards the end of our first section of foundations, but screen printing is another really fascinating way to get color into textiles. Ileana is a facilitator for the printing area, and so can say a whole lot more. But basically, it's a screen, and you apply a sort of plasticized form or shape with an emulsion, and then you can have some of that's cleared away to get exactly what you want. The mesh on those screens is very, very small, so you get high resolution, almost imperceptibly small, and then you just sort of squeegee through some ink, comes right through. The emulsion keeps it from going on everywhere, and so you can put your logo, your design, whatever, onto all sorts of garments. If all the stars align and we really make it happen, there's a chance that we'll have foundations t-shirts at the end of this, where we can make a t-shirt, I survived, I made cool stuff, something like that, or we can all have matching t-shirts if we want. We can be that group of people, because it's fun. It's totally fun. And then there's also heat press, which is a neat one to do, where you can cut it out on the vinyl cutter and you can heat press things on. There's all sorts of different strategies that you can use to get markings onto garments. and they work at various different levels. So there's tons of different strategies for this, but screen printing is a very common one.
How time consuming is screen printing?
Ileana,
Say that again?
how time consuming is screen printing?
Depends
People
on
want to
the
do like a
method that
basic
you
shape
use.
just to get started.
A basic shape just to get started. What do you think?
Um,
You have to set the screen, right?
So there's more than two methods. We're just gonna cover, hold on, let me put the mic on for everybody here. There's more than two methods to do this. We're just gonna cover two really quickly. There's the photo emulsion method, which basically there's a photosensitive emulsion that you apply to the screen. And then that has to cure for a day or two, mostly a day. You can't do less than a day. And it has to cure in complete darkness because it's photosensitive. Then you basically have your design, let's say a triangle, printed in black or double black if you can imagine, if you can manage it. There's ways of setting certain printers to like print double black, but it's basically laying down more ink than I think you need. And what that does is that will put it into a developing under like essentially a developer, which is just this very massive light that is exposing the emulsion. It's almost like a photograph, basically. It's like this massive light. Anything that's blocked won't get like essentially photo cured, but everything else that's open, basically all your black areas don't get cured, all your areas that are clear, you're printing on a film, those get cured with the very high powered light. I don't think it's a UV light, but it's definitely a high powered light. Then you wash the screen. Anything that didn't get hit with the light will come out, which means you now have a stencil that you can push ink through, ink or paint, depending on what you're using. And that will transfer onto the t-shirt. That's one way to do it. That is a multiple day process. There's a second way, which is a stencil cut film, where you just cut your triangle out of film and you adhere it to a screen. And that is an hour process. Very quick. Those screens tend to be less popular because you can't get as much detail because it's all dependent on how you can carve. So like if you're a really good stencil carver and you're really good with an X-Acto knife, you can get great detail with stencil cut film. But a lot of people just go the photo emulsion route because it has pretty much like 99% fidelity to your design when you transfer it to the screen. But the stencil cut film method, you could print in one day. The photo emulsion method is going to take a couple days.
So that means for more detailed designs, the first option would be the preferred option. If you were to stick with a simple design, then would you say that it's also the second option is also easier, not only faster, but also easy?
Yes.
The
Stencil cut method is easier and faster for simple design. Like,
But not viable for.
yeah, I can share some pictures in Slack of some things I did purely with stencil cut film. Very pretty detailed, and it was a couple of layers of color. And then once you add a second color, you can get a lot of dimension with stencil cut film. I'm still working on introducing that method to MakeHaven because they almost exclusively right now only do the photo emulsion method. But one of the things the reason I want to become a facilitator is to introduce an easier method to people who want simple designs.
There's also, and you probably know more than I do about this, but we have a vinyl cutter that you could dovetail in and have a computer do the cutting for the stencil cut. But what I've often known, especially when it's a vinyl cut screen print for the stencil cut, is that those screens don't last as long. Like you're going to get 10 shirts, you wouldn't get 100 shirts out of them.
So essentially the adhesive that's sticking that vinyl to your screen is getting, every time you pass paint through it, the adhesion becomes less and less and less until your vinyl just starts to peel off because it's just the paint. Because it's blocking the paint from going through. So it's not that the paint doesn't go through at all. It's just sitting on top of that vinyl. Eventually it just builds up to the point where it just peels itself off.
Yep. So there's lots of different range for how long this goes, how much detail you can get, but it's a tried and true method to get designs onto garments for sure. So if you want to get other designs onto garments, you can also use ink stitch and the CNC embroidery machine. This is an add-on, an extension for Inkscape that works amazingly well, and the documentation for it is incredibly good. It's a little finicky. You can't like draw a shape and then have it go. So if you worked really hard to understand Inkscape, this is another thing that you have to add on. It's not the same as Inkscape, in that if you want it to look like this over here, you have to draw it like this over here. You have to follow the instructions that work for ink stitch and then follow their instructions, because you're giving it information about how to sew, not how to draw a picture on a screen. So it is like in spirit, it's very different. And like, you know, for this blue line that's here, basically what you're doing is saying, oh, I want you to make a line along this dotted line, centered on the dotted line. I want it to be as wide as these two lines. And I want the stitches that are going back and forth to be oriented along with these cross lines, right? Which is a lot of information to encode. And that may not have made sense on the first run through, but ink stitch needs a lot of information. And so you have to draw sort of goofy patterns that it can turn into real stitched designs. But that said, if you master this, now you're making custom patches that you can sew onto anything or embroider directly onto a jacket that you love. So it has a lot of potential to do those designs. You can make custom pieces. And the video tutorials are actually really, really good. So just gonna pop over to them. This beginner video tutorial series, these are all like 15 minutes long or less. They've got little time marks, fill stitches. All of this is explained. I've watched several of these and felt like I totally understood what was going on, where they'll walk you through exactly how to do all of this stuff. And it does really well. So there's many videos to guide you through on how this works. And it's got a user base that's not nothing. So you can reach out and see all sorts of different pieces of advice for this. So there's lots of opportunity to make that neat. Then also coming back, that is ink stitch. But what we really want you to do this week is to have a chance to get started. So we want you to start with just a few things. So if you're new to textile work, we would really love it if you could run a stitch on a machine. Make a simple pillow as a good week 1 activity. And there's just 1 week of this unit. We're going to circle back and do more textiles after this when we embed electronics in with our textile work. But for right now, we're just going to do 1 week of textile stuff. So make a pillow, make a tote bag, tuft a rug, maybe a small one. Then there's fixing garments, patches, or seams, any of those sorts of things that you might need to do. Those are totally all options that you could go for. And a big part of this is that you can follow the grab bag assignments. This I'll put a link to directly into Slack also, so that it's available for everybody to see. But here's a series of videos that I found that hit right on these topics. And it's not hard to find them. So if you can find one that works better for you, let me know. We'll add it to the list.
Thought of one today on my way over.
Yeah.
Hold on. I keep turning this thing off. You can make your own pom-pom and sew it onto your own hat. Like this thing. And you can actually customize the colors. I've actually been doing a lot of research into this for a personal project. So if that's like, if you want to start really simply, we can do that. This is something I can help you do. Like sticking a pom-pom on top, like, because people have beanies that don't have pom-poms on them. You could add as many pom-poms as you want.
I would love 3 pom-poms on a beanie.
On a hat.
Yeah.
It's pretty much just all hand sewing and basically you make the pom-pom by hand. I have a tool that I'm using. I could lend it to people. It's definitely something that, like, if you feel like you can't get bags on the machine this week because you don't have time, it's definitely one of those things that you can just do, and it's kind of addictive. I've made like 20 pom-poms now, just for various reasons, and it's very fun.
And we were looking at models and templates. There you can make eyeballs and pom-poms where they look kind of like an eyeball. You can make them look like skulls. There's all sorts of weird ways that you can make those into fun, different sorts of designs. it's surprisingly surprisingly diverse what you can do with pom-poms. There are lots of these different processes. And so those are all of our like first actions here. I think that really a good place to start is to get the badge for the sewing machine if you haven't done that. Making a pillow or tote bag is a good way to get started. Or if you've got something to fix, you can absolutely go for that. So and tufting is great. If you've got any experience, it's lots of fun. I know that Renee has some tufting experience. And so there's all sorts of cool different options that you can go along with. But these are sort of the first step recommendations. You don't want to, I would not recommend you try and take on more parachutes or sewing your own jacket from scratch inside of a week. That's going to be a lot, but just make give yourself the latitude to make a coin purse, right? Something to carry around or to organize inside of a bag. Maybe add some detail or sew on a couple patches or make a CNC patch. Could be a lot of fun. So there's all sorts of different options that can work out and be very exciting here. But that's our rundown for textiles week 1, which is very exciting. And now it's time to transition to show and tell, which is very exciting. There's all sorts of things that people have been up to over the past week, and I'm really fascinated to see what sort of metalworking has happened. There's lots and lots of variety, and it's been cool to see people hop in and do their own thing in many different ways. I'm going to stop the share for the Zoom and pop around and do a quick cut over to here and do some screen rearranging. Let's see. For show and tell, we can talk through what all has been going on, what people are up to. You want to do in the room first? Yeah, let's do that. We'll do in what? I'm hardwired in, so I can go to a place if you want me to show off your website, I can pull that up. Oh, all right. Yeah, sorry. We're gonna have Wi-Fi in this room next week, and we're also gonna so it's much quieter. For those of you in the room, do you like this space for a classroom? Okay, great. Then we'll go through the effort of doing this weekly. There will be a room on the first floor at some point where we can like make a semi-permanent home up there. But one of the things that I would ask if anybody's got some time and not running out of here instantly, if you could help me carry this stuff down. We need to get out of the room after class, which is one of the downsides of this particular room. The first floor room one day will be ours. And so that'll be nice. But yeah, it's good to hear. And the sound is it's quiet. It's a quiet space. So good and good to hear. And let's start with.
I can start on that end of the room. You want to start on that?
All right. So. Yeah, I can absolutely pull up the website. Let me just give me a second to do that. Escape. It's like the frequency of the microphone. Foundations. How was your week in general, Vincent?
Really busy.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff, lots of projects that I started, some of them that I finished.
Yep.
They're all ongoing. They're not all related to stuff for foundations, or at least not yet. Some things are different topics.
Sure. Yeah.
I pretty much ran through the metal project pretty quickly because
Cool.
I have a hard deadline of I need to finish this by Thursday night, and whatever's done on Thursday night, I'm going to call it done. If I'm going to do something else, I'm not going to be working on it before today.
That makes sense.
Just because I've been working on so many projects, and for time management, I found that I've been going overtime and like borrowing time from one place, borrowing time from another place.
Yeah, it's hard. Time is definitely a struggle for everybody in these projects. I want to compliment you for being tight in managing it, and also encourage everybody to don't bite off a big project for any given week. So
Right.
yeah.
Trying to find that balance of either I make sure that the projects can be done in, say, like a day, so that way if I have it spread out, it'll be done by the next week.
Yeah.
Or I go in knowing that it's going to be a multi-part project.
Yep. There'll be some weeks where we just sort of like pump the brakes and there's this time isn't taken. And then you have these like extra hour and a half, 2 hours to just work on a project. But for these lesson paired with things to do, the time goes fast for sure. All right. So are we headed to somewhere on the website? All right.
Figure out how I'm going to redo the links because I've been working on projects that are unrelated to the units.
Mhm.
So I need to do like a column of like, here are the things that I'm doing that's related to wood, here are the things I'm doing related to metal, etc. So that way I can just here and there have to like, hey, this project I just worked on that's not really related to this week or something.
That makes sense. Yeah. But interfacing on a website is always tricky.
As you can see, this is a picture of my first files that I did earlier. And you can see I said that I knew I was going to have to cut corners for this. And I wanted it done by today. Whatever it was going to look like, I was going to call it finished.
Sure.
I didn't have enough badges to do all the things that I wanted. And I needed to make do with what I had. So I figured the less I know, I'm just going to stick with the skills I know.
Yep.
The horizontal bandsaw, cutting things down, the wire wheel to clean things up. I ended up not putting the legs on just yet.
Sure.
Because I wanted to make the legs removable because I knew that this wasn't the final design I wanted to work on.
Yep.
And at $25 per square tubing, I thought I should reuse these parts. If this is not going to be a stool,
Right.
this could be an end table.
Yeah.
And I would want to be able to use longer legs.
That makes sense. Yep.
And also, I spoke with Daryl, and he said he's going to show me how to use the water jet so I can close up those ends that you can see there.
Oh, with the water jet by cutting off.
Like a little plate that I would not be able to weld on there, especially if I wanted to make legs.
Yeah.
I could close up the ends of the legs and tap them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead of, say, putting weld nuts in, which was one of the other options.
Yep. Yeah. And then, it depends on what design you're going for, but another good strategy is to like cut a wooden piece that's about this size and sort of tap it in so that it's just in there. Which is not necessarily good for disassembling and like modularity, but it's another one that if you wanted to put something a little softer on the bottom, so it's not going to mar the floor, and you don't mind that, if that look is either what you're going for or you don't mind it, it's another way that you can make an end capped also.
That is a great idea because I really don't want to use, well, I don't really not want to use it, but I don't want to spend $10 on some leveling feet just because I don't have another way in mind.
Oh,
The legs on.
sure. Yeah. And if you just do like wood that is cut to, it's got a step in it. So there's a square part that's perfectly sized to fit in there, or maybe even a little tight. And then it's bigger on the outside. And then you've got an extra like 2 inches. You can get it so that it's set it onto a level surface, get your table, up high, and then you can cut them off so they're all level to each other once you have wood feet on all of the 4 corners. So there's some interesting trickery you can do with that if you're willing to put like a little wood cap at the bottom.
Yeah, that's totally doable.
Yeah.
I also had something similar. So I was gonna 3D print plugs, kind of like what you said.
Oh,
Instead of
cool.
having to woodwork it, I could just
Yeah.
3D print it that steps.
That makes sense. Totally. Cool. Tons of good options. And the Mark Forge would be a good way to 3D print that. Of the 3D printers, there's one that has carbon fiber in it, so it's much stronger. It's probably the way to get nice strong ones if you're going to be moving around and standing on it all the time, which you won't be on yours, but still. Cool.
I ended up, it's not pictured, but I ended up having to give myself a manicure because I took a few photos and I was like, this doesn't look so good.
Oh, but it shows that you were working. That's the big thing. All right. Cool. Very nice.
Hey, Corey, I don't think the mic is working. I think we're hearing through
Oh.
the mic.
Cool. Let me take a look. Is it Audio test, nothing, nope, hold on. Desktop, one moment, please. Thank you for telling us. Has it, has it been like that the whole time, Alina? Yes.
We could
Maybe.
hear slightly for Vincent's. It was just like muffled.
Oh, got it, got it. You know, I think it's probably, we're probably getting it all through the.
Yeah, I think we're hearing it through Corey's mic.
Yeah.
So it's muddy.
Now, yep. But it's muddy. Yeah, okay, all right. We'll try this and see how it goes.
Can you hear me?
Maybe not.
Kind of. Should I just talk real loud?
real loud.
All right, so I actually am operating like a week behind because I've been super busy. So I just got badged on the MIG welder and the horizontal bandsaw Thursday night, and I had no time over the weekend to really do anything. So I will say that MIG welding is really hard, and my welds are all either really crooked or really bad.
It's definitely an art, for sure. MIG welding is something that you get better at with lots and lots of practice.
It's like trying to draw with lightning in the dark.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analysis of it.
This is really hard.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to make a bunch of like basically like throwaway pieces and practice welding them before I spend the money on the tubing for my project, and kind of not just like blast a bunch of goo on there and pray that it comes out good.
That makes tons of sense. Yes.
Should I pass this along?
Yeah, pass it
Okay.
along. I'm still like fiddling with settings.
Fiddling around?
Yeah,
Can you hear me? Guess not.
no, a little bit. Just be nice and loud.
I'm talking loud. Can you hear me? Okay, this is as loud as I get. I'm also operating a week behind, just having been away prior for a week, so. And I'm determined to finish this wood project, even if it fits in some of those other weeks, but I just love doing it. I just want to finish it, so. On Sunday, I turned this dowel. I don't know if you can see it. Can they see it? No, they can't see us.
Yeah, I can pick it up and put it next to the camera.
Well, all right.
We're all like the queen, just like.
So that dowel is the last piece, and now my challenge is to cut square holes in where those mortises, whatever they are, will go through. And I really want to finish this. But so I'm like James, I did the same moment in time, get badged, if you want to call it, on the MIG welder and horizontal bandsaw. And I think I'm in competition for the worst welds of anyone.
No.
Which is sick for me because I solder, but I can't weld. But it was fun. I mean, if you consider being under all those layers of clothing and not being able to see is fun. But on Tuesday, I'm supposed to badge on the water jet. And I'm kind of hoping that when we're practicing, I can do a real file, like I can give it to him. So you want to show. I simply want to cut out the square that you see there and let the other shape drop out of it. And then what that will be, hopefully, is a die I can use in an what do you call it? It's not a pneumatic press, it's a hydraulic press.
Yep.
So that I can punch out shapes for jewelry. So that's, would be my project.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Whenever I can manage to cut this out.
Yeah.
And just lastly, I got at a tag sale this piece of steel. And I'm just trying to explore. I don't think this is the right steel, but if I can temper it and then cut it into shorter lengths and use them as chasing stamps for jewelry as well. But if not that,
I'm trying to understand that there's a certain kind of carbon steel, I guess you should start with. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to try with something that you could get for low cost.
Oh, yeah, this was 50 cents.
Perfect. That's the low kind of cost.
And it's steel.
Yep.
Okay.
Awesome. Should I go to a website or anything?
No, actually we're good. I can just show it here. I was trying to pull up, going back in the day when I used water jet, I wanted to pull up some of those I could have showed, but I don't have them.
The internet is not prevalent here.
Oh, yes.
Can we actually turn off the mic now? Now it's like echoing in both mics are.
Got it. Yep. Okay. Is this better?
Is this better?
Yes. Just everyone speak really loudly, please.
All right, I'll be yelling. So because I've had a good amount of experience with water jet before, I wanted to do something that I didn't do all that much, which was welding. So being inspired from the table legs, I wanted to turn it kind of 90 degrees and make a end table that can kind of slide into my couch. So this is what I made, which still has a lot of ways to go, and it's heavy. But so basically it will stand like this. I'm trying to show. And this side is supposed to, there you go. So when I'm sitting down, this side can kind of scoot into my couch with me, so I can put my laptop on top and just do some work. I put on the first coat of primer. I need to sand it. I need to paint it, and I'm getting a butcher's block, like a scrap butcher's block for top. So that's going to be my top, and I can put my laptop and stuff. Welding was hard. I did not enjoy it, but what was harder was grounding those welds, like with the angle grinder. And I hated even more than that I put all those extra weld parts just because I thought it would hold better. I had to ground through them all, and that was not fun. But I learned a lot, so that's what's happening.
Yeah. Sometimes you learn a lot, and it can be worth it, even if you realize that you would do it very differently.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yep.
I told her that the angle grinder was easier than the
Oh
welding.
yeah. Well, I had already finished my welding at that point, but yes, you did say that it was not, it really killed my arm.
I think it's a different type of, like, the grinder is a physical and the
Yeah.
welding is like, oh shit, I'm like,
I don't know what
I
I'm doing. I
might-
can't see anything.
I might sunburn my eyes, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, the welding is like scary, right? There's a moment of like, I can't see anything, to all of a sudden it's happening. Versus grinding is just like it's a very physical event. And so they're different, they're struggles in different ways. Totally.
I threw some pictures on my website.
All right, I will go find the website. And then here, head back to. All right, class portfolio, metalwork, and I need to make sure that I'm sharing to Zoom. Screen 2, share.
Okay, so I just threw these pictures up here just now. So I am attempting to make something similar to this Murphy fold down table, a smaller version. As you can see, it's $810. And I am not paying that much for a Murphy table. So started with welding the leg, and that's really where I'm at right now. So similar to what everyone else has said, like welding was scary as hell to me. But me and Corey spent about like an hour back there last week, and I like spending time after the first initial time felt like much better. So I'm not as scared. Like once the sparks just started like landing, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna catch on fire or burn myself or whatever. I felt a little bit better. And then yesterday I actually came in with the angle grinder to grind down the wells that weren't great. Also a really good workout, sweating very hard. And yeah, so I'm going to figure out how to attach it. I threw this picture up there. Well, I'll go to that next. I need to figure out how I'm gonna attach the legs and fold them. I'm gonna make the tabletop with all the skills we learned in wood, in the wood shop piece. But I think I'm gonna put a hinge on the metal leg, like a regular, like, I think they're called a mermaid hinge, maybe? I don't know, like a long hinge, and then maybe put like a rubber stop at the bottom of it. Or I was thinking of like kickstand feet to stop it from flying up. Maybe it's not a mermaid hinge. It said that on Amazon. I was Googling things.
Like a piano hinge, maybe, like just like a long.
Oh, piano hinge. Why did I say mermaid hinge? Oh, don't know where that came from, but.
Yeah. Is that image that I clicked? I can't read.
Yeah,
That far
so
away.
like a long piano hinge.
Yeah, piano hinges like this are really good for lots of strength.
Yeah, so I think but the problem is because I don't want it to fly this way, so I need something to stop the leg on this side. But for the actual table, they have like those foldable table brackets that you push the button and it falls down. So that part feels easy to me. It's the leg part that I'm like, how am I gonna stop it from flying away? But the foldable table brackets are pretty sturdy that I think it'll stay still enough. So yeah, probably gonna put some type of stopper on it. And then I threw that up there because I did that on the water jet prior to this class. I'm probably gonna circle back to trying to perfect like a asymmetrical mirror or some type of mirror on the water jet. Because it cracked in some places.
Oh no.
The first try, but
Yeah, water jetting glass is a delicate art that Kate worked really hard to understand. And it's worth sending Kate a message in Slack, who's just K8, like the number 8.
yeah.
And so she's got all sorts of pointers for doing glass on the water jet.
Yeah, she gave me a few. I'm hoping that she'll come in and just help me one day.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, she probably will.
yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, then it's Annie. Would you care to show us what you've been up to?
Yep. Well, I decided to make a flower, and I use the water jet. So I have something similar at home, a flower like this. I took a picture, and then I put it on Inkscape, and just take the petal, and then I put it in the water jet software, and then start to cut it. It was just it's not as easy as I thought it would be. This is something that was in the scraps part.
Yeah.
So I spent 0.
Oh,
Yep.
what is the metal?
It's brass. Yes. Yeah, pretty much. Yes. That it took me like pretty much 2 weeks because someone was using the water jet and then it didn't work, and But yeah, now I really like to work with metal, but I think I prefer to work with wood. Because that's what I learned.
Is it riveted together or what's holding it together?
I don't know the name. The Leo.
Yeah.
He really helped me a lot that we use, but it's like a drill. And you just.
I think it's a rivet.
Yes, yes, and you just put it together. And that's it.
That's so creative. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really nice. And on camera. Yeah, the detail of the 2 A's in it is really like, that's how you know it's a personal piece, that makes a big difference.
Yeah. So that was my project.
There you go. Very, very nice.
Seeing everyone's being creative, like I'm very straight edges with my designs.
Yeah.
I like hard edges, squares, and then I look in here and there's these towels turned with like nice little smooth corners. There's that.
That's
I'm
yeah.
like, that's cool.
Yours is great.
It is amazing to see how different people really get different looks from their from like what they're up to and like how creativity gets expressed by this. It's something that we're going to circle back to, but I think that really one of the beautiful things about making is that it's sort of your personality and creativity made into a thing, right? And not that, you know, rectangles and lines or even brass flowers are your personality, but it's like some part of you is put into that. And so it's really neat to have that come out and see how that reflects you and your interests. So yeah, it's fun. All right, we've got some people at home and would love to hear from all of you if you've been up to anything. And so let's see, we can go in like whatever my Zoom order is. We've got Norm, who's already unmuted and at the top of the screen. Would you care to share with us?
Sure. I'm going to push share screen, and I think it says that you have to re-enable it.
I just did. So give it another try.
Try that again. Okay. So what I worked on was, because this is a door knocker that's in the front of my door and it's really cool and good looking. But the problem is on the other side of it, it's bolted in with just a couple ugly screws. And so what I kind of thought I would like to do is to spruce up the back side. So in Inkscape, I kind of fooled around a little bit, and I've decided that an oval that goes around here would spruce it up. And then as an add-on, if I could get to it, I'd like to do a little designing. And you can see that or at least I can see of this door knockers being a wind god kind of thing, and because it's very windy where that door is. And so I was thinking of these symbols as sort of wind symbols. These are actually scanned from a picture and then converted to vector files, but they create a gazillion little nodes that might make rendering it in a material difficult. I did a simpler one here that is not particularly attractive, but I decided just to focus at the outset on doing the oval with a couple holes for the screws. And then the magic of the water jet turned the Inkscape vector file into the right kind of file and created a pretty good backplate. And I really think that'll by itself look pretty good, but I'm still left with, this is, you know, the kind of notion I'm going for. And this file I'm going to continue working on, and it doesn't even need to be etched on there. You know, I could do it in wood with a Shapeoko, I guess, or I could even 3D print something and paint it, or I might do nothing because it's fine the way it is. But anyway, that's what I was up to.
Cool. That's really fun and so very useful for just making nice little touch-ups around the house.
One idea that might be easier, one thing I've done at least before, is I painted something like that that I cut out of aluminum and then laser cut whatever I wanted to, like laser etch the paint, basically.
That's a great idea. I might do that. Yeah.
So paint it first and then put it in laser.
Exactly.
Yep.
Or if it's iodine.
Yeah, if you anodize aluminum, if you can put some sort of a layer that will laser ablate away, you can totally do that. What was the material that you used?
It was scrap from the I didn't check to see if it was magnetic. It's an 1/8 inch thick, very, very thin stuff. I don't know if it was aluminum or steel.
Yeah. My guess at an 1/8 inch thick, my guess is that it's probably steel, just knowing our scrap pile. And so
it's pretty stiff.
Yeah.
But the problem with etching in it with the current files is that there are way too many nodes. It would have created a lot of useless busy work and excess use of pump and grains of whatever the pump pushes through. And I was unable to simplify it sufficiently. I found that I put it through a different program, which made it even, there's a smoothing thing that's built into it. and that took care of some of the nodes, but the only way I could, and the separate program simplified it further. What I don't want to really do is magnify it up and kind of hand remove nodes. That's just really time consuming. A different tool might actually be simpler. I'm not sure that maybe like the Shapeoko a bit might just in one pass take care of all those nodes, or maybe it wouldn't know what to do. So I'm on that. I'm trying to figure out what to do. What I right now have is a technology problem, because I'm trying to figure out those nodes. They look fine from a distance, but when you go into a close-up, it's tons of needless information and static that has to be eliminated.
Right. Yeah, and it's definitely, there's some art to dialing that in when you do the import and like where they come from. I was actually just working on that with Arvia right before class. And there's a touch of experience that helps with that. So next time that we're in the same space, we can take a look at that file and try and make some sense of it to see.
Or I might try it. I mean, I also thought of having some program where I could draw with a stylus and just try to freehand something. I mean, I don't need to unravel the mystery of the nodes, but if I go that way, that's where I head, and other routes might take me into the same place.
Yeah, there's many ways to come up with a good solution for that one. So that's exciting. Great work. All right. Next up, Renee, you're next in order. Would you care to share what you've been up to this week?
Yeah, so I made a clock on the water jet. Hold on. Yeah. So I made this out of granite. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. This was in the scrap pile, so totally free. I just bought the clock mechanism, which was like $10 off Amazon. So really easy, but yeah. So this is just like a circle and then a very small circle in the middle cut out so that I could put the clock mechanism through. I did not make a vector file prior to going in, so we just figured out how to draw this, like on the software, because I was like, how hard can it be? It's 2 circles, and it was really difficult. But we did figure it out after like 10 minutes. And yeah, I'm like really happy with it. The water jet is really cool. It's really complicated. I think it'll take me a little time before I'm like, 100% comfortable with it, but the cut is like amazing. Like this is totally sanded and smooth, and it's like
is it particularly heavy?
It's kind of heavy, but it's not like the worst.
Sure.
How long did it take to cut?
I think the estimated time was about 8 minutes, and maybe it took that long. It felt like it was a little faster than that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And where did you say you got the granite from? It was just in the scrap pile?
It was in the scrap pile. So I was working on sourcing stone, which is like surprisingly hard. And someone messaged me, maybe it was Lior, saying that there was scrap stone like in the scrap pile that they'd picked up from an architecture firm. So there were just all these slabs of like 1 by 1, like granite, just perfect, like exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, it was great. It was totally worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a nice clock.
Yeah.
Awesome. Alina, how about you? Are you next in the lineup?
I am. I can share my screen. I was not great at taking pictures this time, so I skipped a bunch of steps. But I'll share the pictures that I have, and then I'll hold up the final product. So here is my wood chimes. I got it to work. I am extremely proud of this, even though it feels a little bit like a baby step from woodworking to metalworking. But if you squint, there are some like tracings that I did just using a compass to draw out like what I was going to cut on the bandsaw for the like hanging like wind catcher bit, and then the clapper and the part that actually holds the chimes. For the pipes, this is what the actual metalworking bit, I didn't take any pictures of, I was like head down focused, but cut those to length using the chop saw. There was a cool website that explained like length and music theory when it came to chimes. And so there's a song that I really like, and these are not notes, but the relative like note, I don't know music theory, but the distance between the notes I tried to mimic in these chimes. And so cut those to length based on that website's guidance. And then Corey helped me drill holes using the drill press, and then found that we could use the wire wheel and spin the pipes to create this like cool satiny kind of finish on the outside of the pipe to get rid of the really shiny finish. And so then just strung everything up. What I didn't remember is that long pipes are heavier than short pipes. And so it was horribly unbalanced whenever I first did this. And so had to change the order of my pipes and rebalance it a little bit. But now it hangs slightly straighter. The clapper in the middle is unbalanced still. So I went to Seymour and went to a glass shop and got some cool glass that I hopefully once I get trained on the water jet, I'm going to talk to Kate and figure out how to cut and then make little raindrops, I think, and then use those to hang from the clapper and balance that a little bit. But here's the wind chime, so prepare for wind chime noises. If you hate that, then cover your ears. But
I mean, that looks really nice.
ta-da!
Yeah, and the middle is pretty balanced.
It stays fairly balanced. As long as it's hitting something, it kind of looks balanced. Just when it's standing there for a while, it starts to get unbalanced again. But,
Yeah.
Can we do a thing like where people, like the stores that people are sourcing, or the places people are sourcing things from? and
Yeah.
You drop in the foundation?
No,
That'd be
that's a really good point. It would be super helpful if you could drop in the chat like where you got some of those things. But your pipes look like they were from a home store, right? Like they were just plumbing pipes,
cool.
right?
The glass.
from Lowe's.
Oh, yeah, from Lowe's, and then the glass was from Seymour's. Can you? There's definitely like a spot on the MakeHaven website.
Oh.
I think it's makehaven.org/resources, but I'm not really sure. I'll figure it out, put it in the chat. But that will link to places. But if Alina, if you could put the link to the place, that would be awesome.
I will. And I will just say that place was awesome. They had like 3 different walls of like huge and small sheets of like the most beautiful glass. And I got like, I think 6 sheets that were like anywhere from this size to pretty small for like $30. And I was expecting to spend a lot more money there for how pretty that glass was. So highly recommend taking, and it's a beautiful drive and the town is very cute if you like antiques. So visit Seymour.
Cool. All right, thanks. And then we have Yushi is at the bottom of the screen. Last but certainly not least, how have you been, Yushi?
Been having too much fun, so I didn't go in. So we had our fall break, and just totally used that time to take some rest and visited New York City. So that was what I did. Yeah.
Sounds
So
like
I didn't do anything. I didn't make any progress, either my my woodwork project or the metalwork. But I think I'll actually get to the fabric this week, and I'm thinking like the metalwork parts I might just push it to like later.
yeah, that's fine. There's one of the great things about foundations is that this isn't school. And so, you know, if you need to get pushed around a little bit, that's totally fine. We hope that everybody gets to try all of the different things and that it fits in with life wherever it does. So it's you know, if someone falls tragically behind, then it's time for me to step in and have conversations to make sure that, you know, everything's going well, that life is stable and okay, and that we're getting all the support that we need. But
I know you're super accepting, but I just like to share like my, I guess, mental progress. Right?
yeah, totally. And so any exciting first thoughts about sewing or textiles for this week?
I'm actually I'm going to try to look at the liar case that I put in the back at MakeHaven, and see if I can at least maybe like just get some measurements down, and then see what I could do with that, fix that case.
It definitely feels like an upholstery game because there's all the fabric on the inside.
Right.
So, cool.
Yeah.
That sounds neat. Awesome. Well, it sounds like we've had a lot of cool experiences. I'm excited to see what the textiles are gonna turn into. Anybody at home absolutely know what you're gonna do for a project this week?
I think I want to make a throw pillow and do one of the panels with like punch needled so that it's like tufted.
Oh yeah.
So it could be like a tufted design for like the accent part, and then the rest of it be like canvas or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I am sure it will come out well, but I'm having a hard time like imagining. Yeah, no, that sounds great. That sounds great. This is to be very clear, of the many things that we talk about, this is one of my weaker zones. But I'm always excited to help support, and I can usually figure out how to fix a broken machine. So that part I can do. It's a love-hate relationship with my own personal sewing machine. So I can pull apart a bobbin and put it back together pretty well. But like the visioning a full piece is definitely more of an art that I'm still growing into. So we all have things to get better at. It's just an important piece to keep in mind. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm excited, and I hope that everybody has some fun doing cool things this week. And yeah, that's probably it. Let's call it. Get everybody home and some time to sleep. And we'll see you for everybody who's remote. Have a good night.